We have with us this morning the Principal Director for Gender Affairs in the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sports, Mrs. Sharon Robinson, and she's representing the Minister. Of course, today, being Monday, is Cabinet, and the Prime Minister would not release Minister Grange. And I'm sure by now they are in throes discussing quite important matters. And so Mrs. Robinson has graciously acquiesced to the request to bring greetings and to bring word from the Minister. Now, Sharon is no novice when it comes to gender affairs. She is integral, notice the word, integral to the implementation of the National Policy for Gender Equality, as well as coordinating the qualitative dimensions of social policy action research. Her experience in the cross-cutting discipline of gender and development studies significantly impacts her involvement in the implementation of the National Strategic Action Plan to eliminate gender-based violence in Jamaica. To support Jamaica's Minister of Gender Affairs, and as focal point for the Gender Division, Sharon represents the Ministry through nuanced participation in several fora to ensure the seamless integration of gender in national policies, plans, programs and projects. A transformational leader, trainer, coach and facilitator, she engages key publics through strategic and sustainable collaboration and partnerships towards the achievement of gender equality and women's empowerment in keeping the Ministry's gender mainstream mandate. Would you put your hands together and make welcome Mrs. Sharon Robinson, Principal Director, Gender Affairs in the Ministry of
Halshin Burke, is that how it's pronounced? Great. So, as you heard Mr. Burke outlined, our minister would have loved to be here, but unfortunately she has been detained, retained, contained in terms of the conversations that will happen at Cabinet on a Monday, and so she's unable to be here. So she has asked me to share with you some ideas. Most excitingly, the nexus between the Respect at Work program, which I found very exciting when I read through. And thank you, Tina, for explaining. I was just in gender heaven when I was looking on the screen and seeing all the lovely things. And that gender harmonious workplace, it's not utopian. It's not utopian. And that's one of the reasons why we work so hard, because we want to get to that place where we have a gender harmonious workplace. So to the minister's script. I will do the minister's script and then I will share with you some data out of a study that was done. Now, you know, the World Bank is very gender responsive. And so a study was launched recently, which is very important to what we're talking about, because what it did was to present some data that will allow us to see what the country assessment looks like, and to provide some recommendations that we have started to implement. And of course, there are persons in this room who are very poised to do that. So I will just do a quick salutation, because I'm actually representing my minister, and she's very big on recognizing persons. So I have already recognized the chairperson, moderator, Mr. Burke. I also wish to recognize, I was told that the country program manager is not here in the building. Okay, so do I recognize her or not? Sure. All right, so I wish to recognize, I hope the pronunciation is correct. I'm seeing Ronki Amoni. Do I try any further? Yes. Ongo Shildura. I see country manager, Caribbean region. I am also recognizing Tina Williams, who has worked very hard to get us here, for talking about just presenting the overview. She is the Respect at Work coordinator. I also wish to recognize the panelists. Is that Lauren Marsh? Apologies. I came in, and because I was so taken up with the fact that I had so many things to do this morning, I recognized it had to be you, because you're next to Monique, and both of you are on the same panel. Great. So I'm recognizing the panelists. There are two sets of panelists, and recognizing the moderators as well. I see two sets of moderators. I sat beside Mr. Chen, Wayne Chen. He was involved in very robust conversation, as usual. The president of Caribbean Employers Federation. And there's a gentleman that I didn't get his name because I didn't get to be introduced. Another Wayne. Okay, so they were both engaged so deeply in conversation, I couldn't get to introduce myself even. So I recognize the gentleman as well. And the lady who sits next to me, her name is not on this program, but I recognize you as well. And I see Pat over there. I know the minister would have been happy to see you, Pat. Pat has worked with us in gender for decades and has been blazing a trail in a number of areas and has been doing fantastic work. So I saw on the program that minister has been given 10 minutes. That's nigh impossible, really, but I'll attempt that. So when I saw that, I did something that would allow for 10 minutes. And then I'm going to ask you, Mr. Burke, if I can get a few more minutes after that. Am I allowed? Thank you so much. So as Minister of Gender Affairs, I'll just read the minister's remarks verbatim, and then I'll talk a little bit about the remarks, the study, and the recommendations. As Minister of Gender Affairs, it is indeed a privilege to partner with the International Finance Corporation, IFC, to launch the Respect at Work Caribbean program. This 13-month initiative is strategically aligned with the implementation of the Sexual Harassment Protection and Prevention Act 2021, being spearheaded by my ministry to build a strident and cutting-edge business case for respectful, gender-equal workspaces. Like the sexual harassment legislation, the Respect at Work program will provide tangible support to companies and businesses to tackle head-on the vexed issue of gender-based violence and harassment, which, you know, we love acronyms. So the acronym is GBVH, another one, within the context of work. In similar vein to the Sexual Harassment Protection and Prevention Act, and hereafter I'll just say the Sexual Harassment Legislation, since it's a long name, the Respect at Work Caribbean program will facilitate the unrestricted access to safe, enabling, and harmonious workspaces where the non-negotiable principles of respect and dignity of personhood, property, and possession are recognized, valued, and promoted. The joint outcomes will ultimately redound to the benefit of all parties concerned, and that's inclusive of employers, employees, business districts, and wider communities, the Caribbean, and by extension, the global village. The prevention of all forms of violence, discrimination, and harassment in the world of work is not only a business imperative, but also a societal one. I'm sure you all agree. I therefore applaud the private sector for being true champions for the cause. I implore you to be resolute as you demonstrate radical and transformational leadership and commitment to drive significant change. This will undoubtedly foster enhanced productivity, improved employee well-being, and increased community engagement. Together with the IFC and other valuable partners, we will work tirelessly to create a future where gender-based violence and harassment are eradicated from our workplace, and that's not utopian. In conclusion, I call upon all employers in the Caribbean to come on board as we take individual and collective responsibility to create gender-harmonious workplaces. Let us seize this opportunity to make a lasting impact on the lives of our employees and contribute to the overall progress of our communities. Together, we can build a future where each individual thrives unencumbered by the scourge of gender-based violence and harassment. The launch of the Respect at Work Caribbean program will therefore serve as a powerful and practical platform for the promotion of gender equality, social justice, inclusive and sustainable development. Together, we can work seamlessly in partnership to pivot for purposeful positioning. I thank you. I just delivered the minister's script. Yes. So I know you are excited, as I am, about the sexual harassment legislation and the fact that the minister has called it. Am I right? So the minister has called it that Monday, next Monday at this time, July 3, we will be operationalizing the Sexual Harassment Protection and Prevention Act. What does that mean? That means all workspaces are required to have their employees become aware of the fact that there is a legislation, and if they do not yet have a bit of legislation, they are required to create one. Don't worry, there is help. So we have been mandated as the engine of the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport. You know that there are sections. The gender piece is the engine. So we have been mandated to work with persons to create that sexual harassment workplace policy that states specifically what you think is going to happen in your space, predictive, and then to plan so that in cases where there might be a case, we hope there's none, but just in case somebody, just gets a little ahead of him or herself, because as you know, sexual harassment is gender neutral. And so you can have harassment of male to male, male to female, female to female, female to male. And so the legislation is designed to ensure that it doesn't matter who you are. Once there is an act of harassment, the report is to be made, and once the report is made, the HR has that culpability to ensure that they investigate. And of course, if that doesn't happen, the employee has the right to take that further. And that's the reason we have a sexual harassment tribunal that is at this point being put in place. We already have a consultant. You might have heard the minister announce it, Mr. Danny Roberts, who is very knowledgeable. Mr. Marsh, Dr. Marsh, would know a little more about him than any of us in this room, having worked with him for years. And one of the things we like about what happened in that conversation is that we now have a guideline that outlines very clearly the operations of the Sexual Harassment Tribunal. So that tribunal is designed to be that adjudicating body in terms of the cases that come forward, to hear the cases. How does the Bureau come in? The Bureau of Gender Affairs, of which I'm a part. We are required to take the reports. Once the reports are taken, we are required to feed that report to the Sexual Harassment Tribunal for them to take it further. The panel is supposed to be extremely knowledgeable, and that's the reason they have asked for 14 members. And the strongest qualification would be that they are attorneys at law and that there is a knowledge of workplaces. So we have different groups of persons who are allowed to be on the tribunal. But largely speaking, it's heavily legal, and you understand why, because that's the final arbitration. So if it is, though, that the persons are not pleased with the results of the tribunal when they have done their discussion and so on, they can actually take the matter further to the court. But we've tried to avoid that because we understand that sometimes there might be delays in the court, and we believe that once a report is made, we want to accelerate that as quickly as possible to get it to a resolution. I think I've done due diligence where that's concerned. I want to talk very quickly. I take about 5 minutes. Can I have 5 minutes more? Thank you. I want to talk very quickly about a study that was done by the World Bank, and we found that study very instructive because not only did it tell us what we might know or not, and just give us a very broad picture of the situation analysis, but it also told us some very, like it gave us a knee-jerk reaction to say, so this is what is happening, this is what the context is, this is what you now need to do. So in terms of the economic opportunity, what happened is that that assessment, as you know or not, was funded through the government of Canada, and it was done through its World Bank and Canada, the Canadian High Commission. And what it did was to look broadly at the situation in Jamaica in terms of how we look at the barriers that are faced by men and women, and how it is that in different sectors we have costs that would be borne in different sectors. Since I'm saying this, Monique is here, so I would also tell you about another study, which I don't have time to talk about, which is the ECOVOG. And you know we love acronyms, so it's the Economic Cost of Violence Against Women and Girls study, and that was very telling in terms of what the costs are. So to go back to the World Bank assessment, it found that women's labor force participation is lower than men due to the fact that they are disproportionately affected. And Tina mentioned some of that when she did her presentation, which helps, so I don't have to do all of what I plan to do. So it also gave hope because it said, despite all that's happening and how badly it looks in terms of, women in some cases who are disproportionately affected. It found that there is agency in among Jamaican women, even though it's lower than required. But what we found a little problematic is that we still have a prevalence of patriarchal norms, which we still find a little challenging because, we have been doing this work for many decades, and so we thought perhaps that by now we would see less of that. But I think we are doing well, even though we're going to take so many decades before we see gender equality. That's not really encouraging, but we still press on regardless. While the assessment found that the legal framework for gender equality is and parenthood. Finally, I'll just take one last section. The assessment recommended key areas of action. I'll go quickly to them. We have already started, and I know that the private sector is great on investment, so I'm saying it here. 1, investing in building human capital of women and men, especially young men, who we know are disproportionately affected by so many issues. Secondly, expanding support and promoting the productive role of women. And finally, increasing women's capacity to make decisions and act on them. So I'll just read a quote from the Director World Bank, which sort of synopsizes everything that we're saying in a nutshell. It says, creating a dynamic and inclusive society and providing opportunities for women and girls to acquire the skills and earnings should be an economic priority for countries in the Caribbean and certainly for Jamaica. I thank you.